this isn't the Democratic Party I once knew. This is total insanity. And so that was kind of the first issue where I began to see the Democratic Party going off the ledge. And so I became more of an independent at that point, because I'm not just going to ascribe by a policy that damaging to a city that I love simply because I'm a Democrat. And I think that we've seen in the last 5 years is there's been many issues that the Democratic Party have gone hard to the left on, that I'm not just going to look at those issues and turn a blind eye to them if I don't think that's the way the world should be.
Ready to roll?
Yep.
All right.
Real Texan.
Why should this matter to real Texans? Thanks for joining this conversation with Real Texans, where we talk with men and women who are doing interesting things to improve life in the Lone Star State. So it's real exciting to get to stand with Adam Loewy. You're one of these guys that, when you drive down 35, particularly kind of around the Central Texas area, your face, your name on a lot of billboards.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of fun. So you're a trial lawyer. We want to talk about how evil that sounds, how we've turned that into a bad word, right? But you're fairly prolific on social media. You don't mind. You talk some law stuff. You talk some politics stuff, some culture stuff. And you've always been one of those fellows who's very intriguing to me, and a lot of folks who I know kind of look at you saying, "Oh, I wonder what Adam is saying about this." Oh, it'd be a lot of fun to visit with you and get a bit of background. So you're not a native Texan. You grew up in St. Louis, then headed up to University of Wisconsin, came to UT for law. So I kind of assume school is what brought you to Texas. But why have you stayed in Texas?
Well, I came down here for law school in 2000, and that was, of course, a very exciting moment because you had the governor of Texas running for president.
Right.
You then also had his nephew, George P. Bush, in my law school class, along with a lot of other future politicians, like Chip Roy was in my class, Shelby Slauson, federal judge Matt Kazmarek, and Mitch Little now. He also was in my class. And so it was a very interesting class. There was a lot of very interesting things going on. And I fell in love with Texas very quickly. I loved the people here. I loved the spirit of Texas, the spirit of entrepreneurship. And then that led me to starting my own law firm almost 20 years ago. It was May 2005.
Fresh out of law school.
Very quickly out of law school, about a year out. And what I always tell people is there's no better place to start a business than in Texas. There's just a spirit here of people wanting to help other people, that in Texas, unlike other places I've lived, if you can help someone, if you can do a deal with someone, people want to do business with you. And people here sometimes take that for granted because it is so special. But coming from St. Louis, it's a very provincial place. It's where do you go to high school? Who do you know? But in Texas, it's a very much a spirit of let's make a deal happen. Let's do great things together. And Texans, I feel, root for each other in that regard. So I've been eternally blessed to be here. I tell my boys almost weekly that they are blessed to be Texans, born on Texas soil, and they will always be blessed to have that their entire life. And so I absolutely love it here.
So I want to talk about you fresh out of law school, you start your own law firm. It feels like there's a little bit of hubris with that, right? Isn't most people out of law school, they go, some big firm and they're fairly anonymous for 5 or 10 years and they go do their own thing. What was it about Adam Loewy that said, I want to start my own firm. I want to be my own guy so quickly out of law school?
Well, the short answer is I was not a good employee. I hated working for other people. I got fired from a few jobs, not for any dramatic reason. I just was not a good employee. And I just had a dream for a long time that I can do this. I can start my own law firm. And my late father told me when I was thinking about doing this, he said, look, you've got no clients, you don't have a lot of money, and you have no idea what you're doing. But when I finally said, Dad, I'm going to do it, I'm going to go for it, to his eternal credit, he said, I'm fully behind you. You're going to succeed. I think in his mind, he thought there was no other option at this point. But I will tell you, Michael, that day, May 19th, 2005, one of the greatest days of my life, sending out an email from my 1-bedroom apartment saying I'm starting my law firm. And just the journey I've been on ever since has been incredible. Just one of the greatest things I've done. And it's been just a great ride.
So, not a lawyer, a lot of friends who are lawyers. And it feels like everyone, when they're going at some point in law school, they have images of themselves before the U.S. Supreme Court arguing some great civil rights case, arguing some, landmark decision. And you kind of did that, kind of brushes of that early on with a police brutality case that was fairly well followed and some other things. How do lawyers balance that again, kind of that aspiration of being the big civil rights guy versus you got to pay the bills, and they're just like practical law that has to be done? How do you find that balance in yourself?
I mean, I think that for me, I was so young when I got going, I had to take certain cases on in the beginning. So something like civil rights, I was not someone that dreamed of being a great civil rights attorney. I just kind of fell into it early on, because this was way before Black Lives Matter. This was in a time in which obviously the right was never a big fan of police brutality cases, but surprisingly, many on the left were also not a fan. I mean, this was a time in which the police union in Austin was comprised of a lot of Democrats, and they had a lot of power at the time. Mm-hmm. And so I was very much persona non grata in those early years when I would handle a civil rights case. And so on that issue, I believed in civil rights work. I was proud of the cases that I handled, but it eventually got to the point politically in which it went from, in my mind, that I was focusing on a sole bad act, that something occurred on a shooting, on a critical incident that we felt was a violation of civil rights. I never believed that there was systemic racism through the entire police department, that the entire police department was corrupt, the people that wore a badge were bad. And what I saw as we got closer to the rise of Black Lives Matter in 2015, starting with Ferguson, is it just got, in my opinion, very toxic. And that's when I would do the cases, I wasn't looking at them in that regard. And so I eventually quit doing civil rights work and haven't done it for 10 years. I respect the people that still do it. But for me, I didn't like the circus that was coming with those cases. And so now I'm just doing personal injury cases.
So it feels like for at least 20 years, maybe longer than 20 years, saying someone is a personal injury trial lawyer is kind of like saying, they're the bad guy in town. We have allowed this very nasty implication to be applied to that. But there's a whole lot of folks who actually need representation when they have actually been injured, when they've actually been harmed in a way. One, I guess, as a personal injury trial lawyer, a guy who doesn't shy away from the work you do. How do you explain when someone like me walks up and says, "Oh, you're a trial lawyer," with a sneer on his face? How do you explain the importance of what you do to them?
I think what people need to recognize is it's all about insurance. So we are dealing with insurance companies every day. So in a perfect world, if you were seriously injured in a car crash, you could call up Allstate or State Farm and say, "Look, your insured hurt me. I need to set up a claim. I'm going to have these medical bills. I want compensation for what I went through." And in a perfect world, the insurance adjuster from State Farm would say, "Send us the medical bills. We're going to make you whole. Just give us a little time and let's do it." Mm-hmm. The truth is that does not happen by design. First of all, it is rare they even call you back. They have a policy, which we tragically heard in the Luigi story, of delay, defend, deny. So they deny claims, they delay them, you don't hear back. And if you were to go try to submit your medical bills and try to resolve the case on your own, there is 100% certainty that Allstate or State Farm would lowball you. And so I could tell you hundreds of stories where people showed up where they had $1,000 offer from Allstate, and I was able to represent them and settle the case for $50,000. So lawyers like myself hold these insurance companies accountable. So when you think of insurance companies, whether it's health insurance, auto insurance, homeowners insurance, I don't personally believe these companies are evil. I believe they are ruthlessly profitable. And you can actually look this up. Warren Buffett, the Oracle of Omaha himself, said his best investment of his entire career was Geico. Berkshire got into Geico early on. Why did he say that? Of all the things he's made billions on, He said an insurance company was the best investment because they take money from you, me, your kids, your wife, my wife, and they are sitting on literally billions of dollars. And when they have to pay them out, they don't do it. And they have a variety of ways not to do it. So lawyers like myself hold them accountable, and we're very much needed in these situations, or people are just going to be screwed over.
In the late 80s, you had this pendulum in Texas had swung to the point, we were the judicial hellhole, and you had these crazy cases with wild judgments out there. I think most people, they kind of recognize, it's made a little over the top. Then we come through, and it feels like maybe in some ways that pendulum has swung not back to equilibrium, but we've kind of edged towards making it hard to sue. There has to be a balance there, right? Between, frivolous lawsuits, the crazy, spill a cup of coffee, get $10 million or whatever kind of, urban legend stories are out there, to someone with a real harm not being able to access the courts. I mean,
Right.
there's a balance we have to find, right?
I totally agree. I mean, when I came down there in 2000, you had George W. Bush, as you recall, saying tort reform was a top 3 issue in this state. And Governor Perry, in his early years, also pushed that. Thankfully, I believe the Republican Party has woken up to the fact that this is simply not a major issue. I mean, I think if you list the top 50 issues GOP grassroots cares about in the state, tort reform is not one of them. However, you've got a group in Texans for Lawsuit Reform that every single session, including now, do the bidding of these insurance companies to make it more difficult for ordinary Texans, whether it is a patriotic right-winger or a woke leftist, to make it harder for ordinary Texans to get compensation from the insurance companies. So I think a balance has to be struck, and it is being struck now. There's been a shift back. But at the end of the day, I believe that to be a conservative in this state, and a constitutional conservative, people obsess about the Second Amendment, understandably, and the First Amendment, but the Seventh Amendment is right there. And that's the right to a jury trial. And I think you're seeing more and more with younger Republican members of the legislature. They understand this better. And so I'm optimistic for this session that they will understand what TLR is trying to do. But at the end of the day, TLR will continue to try to push this legislation.
It feels like we're edging people. You brought up the horrible case from New York a moment ago, where we say to folks, you're either just sit there and eventually maybe someone will help you, or we're going to deny access to the courts, or we're going to deny claims on insurance and harms. And that does seem like a breeding ground for people doing irrational, maybe even violent things. And that's kind of why you want access to courts, isn't it? So that,
Right.
If Michael and Adam, bump into each other in the parking lot, we both know that we can eventually get into courts and the judge will figure out who was right, who was wrong, and all those kind of things. But if I don't have that, then maybe I just go and beat you up, get my revenge kind of thing rather than justice. That's where we end up without access to courts, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think you can look at the history of this country and the founding fathers who created this great nation. They made the Seventh Amendment as the right to a jury trial a key component of how this country was set up, because they had come from a country in which there wasn't jury trials and you had the king or the monarchy deciding all these issues. So I believe that jury trials is one of the last true bastions of democracy in this country. You put 12 people in a box, you let them decide what happened, whether it's a dispute between us, a dispute in a car crash case or a commercial litigation case, and you let the people decide. And I think you have certain groups like TLR that have worked for decades to take that away from people, where they want to close the courthouse door. They want people to be in a world in which the Allstates and the State Farms can get what they want, and so they can make more money, and they harm ordinary Texans by the laws that they're trying to pass.
How do we block against lawfare? How do we block against that idea of one of my own lawyers likes to refer to oftentimes the processes of the legal system are the punishment.
Yeah.
How do we get around that? How do you balance the accessibility of the courts with someone being dragged into them because they posted a meme that some politician doesn't like, or whatever.
Yeah.
How do we balance those?
Well, look, I was very public about this from early on. I thought the prosecutions of Donald Trump were one of the worst things this country has seen. People throw around the term constitutional crisis too easily today. But if Donald Trump, the leader at the time in the last 4 years, the leader of the opposition party, was jailed for what he allegedly did, and I believe we were on that path if he had not won the election, we would have had a crisis unlike any crisis in the history of this country. So I thought those prosecutions were an embarrassment. I thought they were very dangerous. And I think the American public spoke loudly that they rejected what was going on there. So I would say that that was a scary moment. I think that lawfare in general has to be rejected by both sides. I think we cannot have a country in which people serve and then are worried about being prosecuted for what they did. But that's going to fall on both sides. And both parties need to commit to dialing it back on this stuff, or I think that the country is going to continue to deteriorate.
You mentioned earlier there are a lot of folks who like to follow you on social media, in part because you're. I mean, this might sound insulting, but sound something. You're really hard to define. And I like that. I'm not sure a lot, we because of social media, because of everything must be politics, we expect everyone to fall into a neat little category, but you seem to kind of relish a little bit in swinging a baseball bat at the categories people could place you in. I have some Republican friends who I mentioned that I was going to be visiting, think, oh, that guy's a crazy leftist. He's a Democrat. Why don't you talk to him? A couple Democrat friends just this morning, actually. I'm going to be meeting Adam Loewy, and I'm real excited about having an interview. And they said, oh, he's a sellout. He's a sellout. I'm really looking forward to talking to him now because, you do seem to take that a little bit of relish in being yourself and not let yourself be defined by others. How do you define yourself? How do you define your take on politics and culture?
Well, I think that I used to be a partisan Democrat. And what happened was, starting in 2018, I got very troubled by the surge of the far left in the party, starting with the election of the squad. And then closer to home, the 2019 homeless camping ban repeal was the craziest thing I've lived through other than COVID itself. And for viewers that aren't aware, the city of Austin, by unanimous vote, repealed the camping ban. And so suddenly you had all these homeless people camping everywhere, including on our beautiful trail downtown. And I was at the time close to the then mayor of Austin, Steve Adler, and I went on Fox Local and criticized him and the council, saying this was crazy. And he called me into his office. He was very upset with me. And he spoke to me for 30 minutes, and he was rattling off all the talking points of, well, we need to identify who the homeless people are, and we can't do that if they're in the woods. And I said, Steve, they're camping on the trail. They're camping all through downtown. This isn't the Democratic Party I once knew. This is total insanity. And so then I got involved, along with Matt Mackowiak and others, with Save Austin Now to initiate the ballot initiative in 2021 to reimpose the camping ban. And so that was kind of the first issue where I began to see the Democratic Party going off the ledge. And so I became more of an independent at that point, because I'm not just going to ascribe by a policy that damaging to a city that I love simply because I'm a Democrat. And I think that what you've seen in the last 5 years is there's been many issues that the Democratic Party have gone hard to the left on. Defund the police, COVID lockdowns, more recently, some of the trans issues, that I'm not just going to look at those issues and turn a blind eye to them if I don't think that's the way the world should be. And so I have differing views. I have friends on both sides of the aisle. And with respect to partisans, which I once was, I just don't think it's the proper way to look at the world, because I think that both parties have good ideas at times, have bad ideas at times, and you need to determine which one's best for you.
It feels like the parties certainly have their place and certainly useful, but we've it feels like we have turned ourselves into warring tribes
Right.
Where, I'm a Republican. I wear my elephant jersey with my Ronald Reagan tie. You're the Democrat. You've got your donkey jersey with your, FDR bow tie on, and we're just going to duke it out over what color the sky is. That's not healthy by anyone's definition, is it?
I don't think so. I mean, as I've said, I'm friends with people on both sides of the aisle. And, someone like a Speaker Burrows, I've been friends with Speaker Burrows for 5 years now. I like him a lot personally. His policies, I like some of them, others I disagree with, but we can be friends. And I think that we don't have enough of that in politics anymore. There's people that think if I'm a Democrat, I only can be friends with Democrats. And why are you even talking to a Republican, and vice versa? And I just think that's a very strange way to go through life, because if you do like politics, it's fun on all sides. It's fun to see just the different issues and fights and debates that occur in parties, between parties, and so forth. And so I've enjoyed my life a lot better when I've branched out from just saying, oh, I'm a hardcore Democrat and that's all I'm going to do, to, I'm friends with a lot of different people and think for myself.
There was that sense when you look at the pictures. I'm a little older than you, so I kind of half remember it. But I know you'll know what I'm talking about. The idea that when you'd see Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill,
right.
chuckling it up at some state dinner or something, the leader of the Democratic Party, the leader of the Republican Party, and just having a good time. Now, they disagreed on things. They were very honest about their disagreements, but they were able, though, to disagree in an agreeable way.
Right.
In part because both of them seem to have a sense of love for country. And they recognized that each of them loved the country and that each of them wanted what was best. They just disagreed on how to get there.
Right.
And today it feels like we've substituted love of country for, in some ways, maybe love of self, love of being right. I'm going to be right. If I have to knock you unconscious so you stop disagreeing with me, I'm going to be right. And that's again a hard way to live, isn't it?
I think so, and I think it's a strange way to live. I mean, doing personal injury law, I represent ordinary Texans every day. Yeah. I've represented hard right people, hard left people, and everybody in between. When I'm representing a client, I don't care what their politics are. Mm-hmm. And so when you get to the political situation, I think that it is better if people are talking. I mean, one of the problems with the Adler era, which I'm very happy Kirk Watson, the current mayor, has fixed, is Steve Adler literally never called the governor. I mean, they were literally 1 mile away, and he never called the governor or would take a call from the governor. And Mayor Watson, when I had dinner with him a few months ago, said he does occasionally talk to Governor Abbott, Lieutenant Governor Patrick. That's what you want, because we're all living in the same city. You want people to be able to have the lines of communication open, because if we're in a world in which no one's talking to each other and everyone's just fighting on X, it's fun, but I don't think things get done, and you create environments in which it's harmful for the public.
I've often I've asserted this to be true. I'd like to see if you think it might be some truth to it. That a big lie that we've adopted in our culture is that in polite company we don't talk about our faith or politics, and it feels like a lie to me, because in many ways that's kind of the opposite. Oh, so we only talk about politics and faith in impolite company?
Right.
It seems like maybe as friends we should talk about these things so we can sharpen each other up, where we can build each other up and maybe find our weaknesses. But instead we do just kind of retreat into huddling on our phones, posting mean things on X, rather than having maybe even a hard conversation with a friend. But we've been told not to do that. That's not very fair to our republic, is it?
I don't think so. I think it's very harmful. And I think that what we've seen with the whole Trump era, which we're now in the 10th year or so, is you have a group of people that just can't comprehend the idea that people like Donald Trump. And I thought that it was actually very healthy that when he won the popular vote. Mm-hmm. Because I think if he hadn't won the popular vote, there would have been a lot of problems about legitimacy. But when people see that the majority of this country voted for Donald Trump, it doesn't mean if you didn't vote for him, you're supposed to like him. But I hope it opens people's eyes, especially people living in a Travis County or Harris County, kind of Democratic counties, that there's a whole nother world out there that we often do not see in Travis County. Mm-hmm. And so I think that it's very important that people recognize that people do have differing views, and we can hopefully talk about things differing views, because I think the initial Trump term, people just would refuse to interact with people if someone supported Donald Trump.
I'll shift gears for a second. Speaking of social media, you posted, it's been within the past month or two, you posted noting that you had hit 12 years of sobriety, and kind of reading through then some of your comments there. What pushed you to sobriety, and what advice, what encouragement would you give to someone who might be needing to consider that in their life?
Well, as I've said online, and I'm very open about it, I mean, sobriety is the greatest blessing in my life. I mean, for 17 years before I quit drinking, I would be described probably as a highly functioning alcoholic, in which I was able to do well in school, do well in law school, but I would always designate, Friday, Saturday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, go out. And when I would start drinking, I just didn't stop drinking. And this would continue through my 20s to my early 30s. And it eventually reached the point in which I realized it was just being very detrimental to my health, to my life, to my well-being. And by the grace of God, I was able to stop February 9th, 2013. So it's been 12 years. Everything in my life that is a true blessing is the direct result of sobriety. I met an incredible woman. We have 2 incredible boys. My business took off. I've been succeeding in other areas. And so what I always tell people who are struggling is take the step and try to get help. And one easy step I tell people is just go to an AA meeting. You don't have to talk. You can just sit there, but just go to the meeting and just see how it is. Just put yourself in that room. And if you feel like talking, feel free. But if you don't, just listen. And I think that by just taking a small step like that, a lot of people can get on the road to recovery. But I'm always open to talking to people. I'm involved in TLAP, which is the state bar's program for recovering lawyers, and I give a lot of speeches about it. So for me, it's the best thing I've ever done, and I'm a very big believer in it.
It feels like for a lot of those folks, and there's the we meet a guy like you who's you're now well into sobriety. Things are well, things are great. But for those folks who are trapped in independence, say, there is that, oh, this looks really hard. And it is hard, isn't it? Your first day wasn't a cakewalk, I would imagine, was it?
No, it's tough. The initial year is difficult. You have to rewire your brain into thinking of things like I used to think, well, how am I going to go on a date if I'm not drinking? How am I going to go to a bar event if I'm the only lawyer not drinking? Of course, it's all in your head. Not everyone was drinking, but when you're drunk, you think everyone's drunk with you. But eventually you realize all of this stuff is in your head. And then for me, I kind of got addicted to sobriety. I started feeling better. I was waking up earlier. I was much happier. And then on a more somber note, I had a very close friend who drank himself to death at 44. I have an ex-law partner that wound up getting disbarred because of drugs and alcohol and some behavior associated with that. So I've seen the downside of this. And as you know, when somebody dies from drinking or drugs, it's often not in the obituary. People don't lead with that. But there's upwards of 125,000 Americans that die from this stuff every year. So it's a real public health scourge at this point. I don't like the rise of the permissive drug culture we have now. I think it's killing a lot of people, literally. And I think that this country would be a lot better going back to the idea that the whole, half the country should not be high at any given time.
You have, I'm going to shift gears on you again real quick. You have begun engaging in philanthropy. I've enjoyed seeing, though, your philanthropy is very, very neighborhood focused,
Yep.
which I kind of explained to me. I know you support Shalom Austin, which is the local Jewish newspaper in kind of serving the greater Austin area. But then also you started a park, a playground near your home. Why are those kind of things the objects of your philanthropy rather than some bench at some museum back in St. Louis or something like that? Why is it important for your philanthropy to be local?
Well, so Shalom Austin's the Jewish Federation. It's kind of like the hub of Jewish life in Austin. We're very proud Jews. We're very engaged in the community. And so we think it's very important to support that organization. The Loewy family playground was such where we had moved to Northwest Hills 10 years ago when they were putting a campaign together to do it. And it literally was stuck in the mud, meaning they couldn't raise the money to get it done. And I talked to the organizers about 6 months later, said, look, how far are you guys away? They said 50,000. I said, there's no business, there's no corporation. They said, we're done. We can't find anyone to do it. And so I was in a position where I could do it. We came in, we got it finished. And ironically, we opened it almost 5 years ago to the day. So of course we opened it, I think it was March 12th, 2020. And then of course the city shut it down 5 days later because of COVID. But nonetheless, we eventually got it back open.
Don't seem bitter at all about that.
No, I was not happy with the city of Boston's COVID policies, but it's been incredible. I mean, a playground, as you know, when you have little kids and you're able to bring the kids to the playground, the amount of joy and happiness a playground brings to the community is immeasurable. And I think investing in things like that help the community is something that my wife and I love doing.
And y'all have now got a baseball field.
We named a baseball field.
Maybe a future major leaguer will come out of there.
Yeah, out of Northwest Little League. So we like to invest in youth sports and anything we can do to give back to the community.
What's advice that you wish someone had given you when you were starting out as a lawyer, starting out in law school? What's advice you wish someone had given you that you would want to pass on to others?
Well, the easiest one for me is quit drinking. But at the time when I was young, I probably wanted to listen to that. I would say that it's just important to chart your own path. When I started my firm at 27, people thought I was crazy. And I probably was, but I really wanted to do it. And I think when you really want to do something, kind of like what you've done with Scorecard here, when you're committed to doing it, it's likely going to work. And if it doesn't work, at least that's what you wanted to be doing. And I think I see a lot of people in law that are kind of stuck in jobs they don't really like, but they just continue to do it. And so I always commend the people that bring their passion in what they're doing and can apply it. Kind of like Tony McDonald, who I find extremely interesting on Twitter. He has a passion for right-wing politics and intertwining that with law. And that is someone living his passion. And so I love to see that. I love lawyers that are following their passion. And I think that is probably the best advice I could give a young lawyer.
Well, Adam, thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Michael.
And thanks for joining us. Hope you have a fantastic week and catch us again on Real Texans.